athlete, the recommendation is 60 and over to do shorter duration, more intense workouts, and then spread them out in a way that you have like a longer recovery time. Hi, welcome to the Judy Torel Show, where I explore topics intended to optimize every body 50, 60, 70, and above. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Judy Torel Show. And if you're joining me on this episode, then you are on the second installment of 6 on my series on how to train as an over 60 endurance athlete. So my first episode was explaining the terms and what are some of the variables that come into play when you're talking about some of the things that need to change or be kind of refined on your approach when you're over 60 for your sport. And endurance athletes will include half Ironman and longer distance triathletes, marathon and longer runners, and 3-hour plus events for cyclists. That's my terminology. And so in other words, events that take hours to complete. And so you need to be taking an endurance approach to these events. But if you're over 60, there's a set of protocols that needs to come into play that is different than when you were even in your 50s and definitely when you were younger. And so with that in mind, this episode, I'm going to address the training technique of intensity. So number one, as I said in my first episode in this series, the science is now showing that as you're getting older, 60 plus, longer duration workouts are less desirable to higher intensity workouts because there's less wear, like they're less in the duration of which it takes to do them is less, and the longer workouts kind of like the science is showing there's a law of diminishing returns at play there. So the longer you go, you're getting less and less of a benefit for the effort that you're putting in, and you're increasing more and more of the risk that you might, to be depleting yourself or getting injured. Now, there's a problem with that if you're in an endurance sport, but I am going to address that in the next episode. How do you rectify that? The science is showing that as you're over 60, you don't want to do these long trainings, but your sport that you're involved in, it requires it. Hold that thought, because I want to do intensity, which is another important part of, the training process. And that is not the longer, like where you're going at aerobic capacity and you're going for long times. Intensity is where you're above your aerobic capacity and you're doing for a shorter duration at a much higher intensity and output level. And there's a more intense wear and tear on your body. But you're going to get a better bang for your buck over 60 in terms of the benefits with less of a liability because it takes a shorter period of time to do it. So this is being generally recommended for even if you're a general fit person who's trying to stay fit or healthy, not an endurance athlete. The recommendation is 60 and over to do shorter duration, more intense workouts, and then spread them out in a way that you have like a longer recovery time from doing them. But what's an endurance athlete to do? If you need longer recovery time, you need the longer endurance trainings, but you also need these higher intensity ones too. So higher intensity workouts, let's define these because they come in a variety of ways. So high intensity workouts can be on the cardiovascular side of the trainings. They're going to be your track workouts where you're doing intervals of quarter mile repeats at the fastest you can go, and then recovery in between and doing a series of them, maybe 4 to 10 at very high output. But that whole workout might take, 30 to 45 minutes. High intensity workouts would also be when you're going out for a bike ride or a swim possibly. And you can do that kind of interval work I just said on a track, like for cycling and swimming and running as well, not on a track. But there's another type of intensity workout where you're doing what's called a tempo, where you're not going at your aerobic capacity. You're not doing the high end on a track workout kind of thing or short sprint intervals, but you're going out and you're pushing your heart rate right on the line where you might, of anaerobic threshold. And that is intense. Now, that might be longer than 45 minutes, but it's generally shorter than multiple hours. That's a second type of intensity that endurance athletes need to do. And then the third type of intensity is doing strength work where you're loading your muscles with a resistance force, whether it be a band or a weight, some sort of a resistance, where you are actually ripping muscle fibers because you're either doing high weight and low reps, but with enough to rip up the fiber. That is not recommended for over 60. I'm going to cover this in another episode. But what is recommended for us is a more moderate weight, but enough repetitions that you're still ripping up the fibers so that they rebuild and regrow and you get stronger and keep your integrity to your muscles. But that is a high intensity type workout that is also in a endurance athlete's repertoire and needs to be. But so the interval type shorter duration workouts, the tempo workouts that are a moderate duration, both in the cardiovascular realm, and then the strength training, where you're ripping the muscle so it rebuilds, and you need recovery from all three of those, a longer recovery. So how do you fit them into your weekly workout schedule if you need a multitude, all three of those type of intensity trainings, but there's only 7 days in a week. And as a 60-year-old athlete, you need more recovery time between each one. So what's an endurance athlete to do? Dilemma. So here is my over 60 hack. It is what I do for myself. It is what I do when I'm coaching athletes and I'm actually designing their training programs. And it is what I'm going to recommend that you who are listening to this podcast, who's an endurance athlete over 60 and 60 and 70, specifically 80s too, but there's less of us in that category as of yet. What do you need to do in your weekly, how do you get this all in so you get the benefits without the liabilities? So what we have to be thinking when you're over 60, because we need this longer recovery time, is we have to extend out and we have to have a training plan that's not looking at a 7-day interval, but is actually going out to be somewhere between a 10 and 14 day perspective. You can't fit in the active recovery time that you need from these intense workouts if you're looking at just a week and you're trying to get them all into a 7-day period as an over 60 endurance athlete. You've got to look at either 10 to 14 days out and doing a 10 to 14 day cycle instead of a weekly cycle when you are trying to fit in all these workouts into your program. And that's what I do for my athletes who are over 60. So in other words, I might put in a interval day of running and then give 2 days of active recovery and then put in a tempo day and then give 2 days of active recovery and then put in a strength training day and then give 2 days of active recovery and then do another cycle of that. But if you did the math on that, that is 9 days, 2 days recovery and a 1-day interval of high intensity with 3 different types of intensities. So you can't fit that all into 1 week necessarily when you're over 60 because you need the active recovery time. Now, I'm not even talking about the intensity that comes from getting your longer duration workouts in. I'm going to address that in the next episode because that needs to be factored into this too. But I want to make sure that you understand how to do this intensity work so then you can build in the longer duration work to the intensity work, which is very important, especially when you're over 60 because, as I said in my first episode, as a 60-plus-year-old athlete myself and coaching athletes that are over 60, the first thing that you're going to let go when when you wake up and you look at your training plan and it says to do an interval workout, you say to yourself, you know what? I don't want to do an interval workout. I'm tired. This aches. My knee hurts, blah, blah, blah. And then you will make it an endurance athlete, an endurance training, and stay at a lower level. And now you are going to be further degrading your athletic ability. And we don't want to do that. So how do you build in the intensity so that you can do it and feel recovered enough to then, when you look at your training plan and see the next one come in, not just say, you know what, I think I'm taking the day off. I don't feel like doing that. What you need to do is be looking out, like I said, longer into a 10 to 14 day training cycle. So that's my first hack. My second hack is, especially if you're a triathlete, for instance, because now you have to have like an intense tempo day and interval day for 3 different sports. So now how do you get all those in, plus the strength training with active recovery into a 7-day period? Like, not happening, okay, as a 60 plus athlete. So my second hack is, and this is going to be counterintuitive, like it is desirable for you to put maybe a interval track workout, or let's say an interval cycling workout, where you're doing, like mile repeats at your highest output and then a mile recovery in a series of, let's say, 6. And that's an intense workout. You're going to need active recovery for 2 days after that, but we still need to get some other intense workouts in. So what I will often do is I'll put in like an intense track type workout for whether it be cycling, running, or swimming, and I'll couple that on the same day with an intense strength training workout, and then I'll give 2 days of active recovery. It seems counterintuitive, but that's better from when you're over 60 to put it into the same day and then have 2 days of active recovery than it would be to have an intense day of like an interval type workout on your cardio, let's say cycling or running or swimming, and then the next day do an intense strength day, because now 2 days in a row you're now more susceptible to injury and undermining the development of your athletic prowess than if you put them on the same day and that it had 2 days of active recovery. Like I said, it's a little counterintuitive, but putting 2 intense type of workouts in one day with 2 days of active recovery, or 3, versus putting an intense of one type and then an intense of another type and then intense of another type and then an endurance one, and then take an active recovery day, which is kind of how you design something if you are designing something for a 40 or 30 or 20-year-old. That is less desirable for 60 plus than to put the 2 together in one day and then have a longer active recovery for the joints, for the muscles, for your whole system in general, because of hormonal changes that we are now living the bodies of when you're 60 plus. Hormonal being less human growth hormone, less testosterone, less estrogen, less vasopressin, which has to do with hydration levels in your body, less more susceptibility to increased cortisol, norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are your hormones that are produced under stress, and high intensity workouts are stress. So there's changes to how the human body adapts to those and can recover from those hormonal things that go on during these workouts, that makes putting 2 together in one day and then a longer active recovery time period more desirable for the 60 plus athlete. All right, so intensity is important. We can't let that go even though we're over 60. We need it even though we are endurance athletes. How do you get it in a way that is going to allow you enough active recovery? 2 hacks: put 2 in one day with 2 days of more active recovery type workouts, and extend your training cycle to a 10 to 14 day cycle and not stay within the block of a 7-day cycle. All right, episode number 2. How to get the intensity workouts in there in a way that's going to fit for a 60 plus year old endurance athlete. We have now checked that box in the series. The next episode is going to be about now how do you get the longer endurance ones and mix them into those intensity workouts in a way that's not going to be undermining you and your athletic performance. So you're going to stay tuned for that episode. And as always, I want to make our second 50 years even better than our first 50 years, hence my podcast and my work. And thanks for tuning in. Give me some feedback, go to my website to get some more tools and information, judytorel.com, and be well until next episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you'd like to have access to some of my additional resources, I can be found at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website, www.judytorel.com.